fresh blood spreading across a white handkerchief was not a sign of death. It was heaven's most shocking and irreversible invitation to a little girl. This was not just the death of a nun. It was a hidden war launched by unseen forces to change the fate of an empire. During a forbidden conversation, even the Pope trembled, because the words that left this little girl's lips carried a truth too terrifying to ignore. Moments before the guillotine fell, an unexplainable miracle shattered the chains of a hardened killer. The deep wounds this modern world carved into your soul can be healed instantly by the ancient secret hidden within Thérèse's life. If you are lost in the darkest labyrinth of your life, there is a hidden door waiting at the end of this video, leading to a light you have never seen before. If you leave now, you will lose the spiritual armor that generations protected, and only a few were chosen to receive. What was the terrifying vision she saw in her final breath? And why is the whole world still hiding this secret?
France trembled under a blood-red horizon in 1873, still reeling from the catastrophic Franco-Prussian War. The Second Empire had collapsed into ruins, leaving the Third Republic to struggle against radical fires and civil unrest. Within this fractured landscape, a silent spiritual battle for the nation's soul began. In the quiet town of Alençon at Rue Saint-Blaise, a fragile light flickered against the encroaching darkness. Louis and Zélie Martin waited in hushed anticipation, their hearts heavy with the memory of 4 lost children. The air was thick with prayers as the winter wind rattled the shutters. On January 2nd, Marie-Françoise Thérèse Martin drew her first breath, a cry so faint it seemed the angels might reclaim her. She was a delicate flower born into a garden of thorns, her tiny frame seemingly too weak to survive the harsh realities of a wounded, cynical France. The infant's health plummeted rapidly, casting a somber veil over the Martin household. Zélie, already suffering from the hidden corruption of cancer, could not nourish her youngest joy. It appeared that Sainte Thérèse would become another tragic tombstone in Alençon before her story had even truly dawned. Desperate, the family sent the dying babe to a wet nurse in the rural hills of Saint-Malais. Louis Martin watched the carriage depart, wondering if his little queen would ever return. The political storms of Paris mattered little compared to the flickering heartbeat of this tiny, struggling girl. Yet, heaven held a different decree for this fragile child born amidst the wreckage of empires. While the world looked toward generals and politicians to save France, God prepared a hidden champion of love. Sainte Thérèse clung to life with a mysterious tenacity that defied her physical limitations. As she grew stronger in the countryside, the little way began its silent, invisible germination within her soul. The specific date of April 2nd, 1874, marked her triumphant return to Alençon, a healthy miracle in her father's arms. The shadow of the empire began to retreat before her. Little did the world know that this pampered daughter would eventually conquer hearts across every continent. Sainte Thérèse was the answer to a nation's despair, a beacon of purity in a secular age. Her journey had begun, small as a grain of sand, yet destined for eternal glory. The sun-drenched gardens of Lisieux could not mask the creeping chill of mortality within the Martin household. In 1877, the vibrant Zélie Martin faced her ultimate agony as breast cancer consumed her strength. Young Sainte Thérèse watched, her innocent heart sensing a looming eclipse that would soon darken her world. Death is a relentless thief, especially when it targets a mother's embrace in the quiet streets of Alençon. On August 28th, the house fell into a tomb-like silence as Zélie's soul departed for eternity. For 4-year-old Sainte Thérèse, the world's colors suddenly faded into a cold, monochromatic gray. The funeral procession moved like a slow black river toward the cemetery, carrying the woman who was Thérèse's entire universe. Louis Martin stood shattered, his little queen clinging to his hand with a desperate, trembling grip. Sainte Thérèse felt the first jagged crack in her fragile childhood porcelain. In the wake of the tragedy, the family abandoned Alençon for the secluded beauty of Les Bissonnets in Lisieux. This new villa became a sanctuary and a fortress, where Sainte Thérèse sought refuge from the echoing void. Yet, the ghost of her mother's absence lingered in every silent hallway. "Pauline will be my mother," the young girl declared, choosing her eldest sister to fill the gaping wound. Sainte Thérèse sought a human shield against the bitterness of loss, unknowingly building her joy upon another fragile foundation. Her hypersensitivity began to bloom, a delicate flower reacting to the slightest autumn chill. Modern souls often drown in the waves of grief, searching for meaning in the wreckage of broken families. Sainte Thérèse's early sorrow mirrors our own anxiety, reminding us that even the greatest saints were forged in the furnace of tears. Her pain was the soil where deep compassion eventually took root. The joyful child vanished, replaced by a shy, weeping girl who felt the weight of the world too heavily. Sainte Thérèse struggled with a spirit that seemed too thin for the trials of life. Every small criticism became a storm, every minor setback a flood that overwhelmed her weeping soul. O Lord, heal the wounds of those who walk through the valley of early loss and broken hearts. May the intercession of Sainte Thérèse bring comfort to every orphan and grieving child searching for light. Guide us through the shadows of our own heartbreaks toward your eternal, motherly embrace. The spring of 1883 brought no joy to the silent halls of Les Bissonnets, as a mysterious fever ravaged Sainte Thérèse. Her fragile mind became a battlefield of terrifying hallucinations where shadows twisted into grotesque shapes. The 10-year-old lay trembling, her life hanging by a fraying thread of mortal hope. Around her bed, the Martin sisters gathered like a string of weeping onions, their faces etched with absolute despair. They watched helplessly as Sainte Thérèse drifted further into a sunless abyss of delirium. Medicine offered no cure for this spiritual and physical storm that threatened to extinguish the little flower. In the corner of the sick room stood a statue of the Queen of Heaven, a silent witness to the family's agony. On May 13th, the Feast of Pentecost, Marie and Léonie knelt in desperate prayer, begging for a miracle. Sainte Thérèse turned her pleading eyes toward the cold stone, seeking a final refuge. Suddenly, the world grew still, and the carved stone of the statue began to radiate an unearthly, celestial warmth. Sainte Thérèse saw the Mother of God come alive, her face glowing with a beauty that surpassed all earthly light. The Virgin Mary looked upon the suffering girl with infinite, divine tenderness. In that breathtaking moment of grace, the Virgin Mary gave Sainte Thérèse a radiant, heavenly smile that shattered the darkness. The terrifying phantoms vanished instantly, replaced by a profound peace that flooded the child's soul. The miracle was complete. The touch of the supernatural had mended the broken girl. Modern hearts often ache with invisible wounds and mental shadows that seem impossible to heal or overcome. Sainte Thérèse's miraculous recovery reminds us that a single glance from heaven can restore the most shattered spirit. She teaches us that even in our darkest delirium, the mother's smile remains our ultimate hope. Behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age, the scriptures whisper through the centuries of faith. Saint Thérèse clung to this divine promise as she rose from her bed of sorrow, completely restored. The specific grace of May 13th remained a secret fire burning within her heart. O Blessed Mother, whose smile brought life back to the dying Saint Thérèse, look upon us in our hours of distress. May your gentle light dispel the hallucinations of fear and doubt that haunt our weary modern souls. Grant us the courage to trust in the miracles of your eternal love. The stone walls of the Benedictine Abbey School in Lisieux felt like a cold, gray prison to Saint Thérèse. Surrounded by boisterous girls, the sensitive child became a target for subtle cruelties and mocking whispers. She moved through the corridors like a shadow, her heart bruised by the world's harshness. An invisible storm began to brew within Saint Thérèse, far more terrifying than any playground taunt from her peers. A spiritual affliction known as scrupulosity seized her mind, turning every innocent thought into a potential mortal sin. Her soul was caught in a relentless trap of agonizing, religious self-doubt. Is this a sin? Did I offend the Almighty with a single glance? She wondered in the silence of the night. Saint Thérèse found no rest, for the enemy of peace whispered lies into her weary young ears. The little queen was now a prisoner of her own heightened, anxious conscience. In the confessional, Saint Thérèse sought relief, yet the shadows of guilt returned before she even left the chapel. Every small imperfection felt like a mountain of coal upon her chest, suffocating the joy of her youth. She was drowning in a sea of rigid, unforgiving religious perfectionism. Modern minds often recognize this darkness as the crushing weight of anxiety and the paralyzing fear of never being enough. Saint Thérèse's struggle reflects the modern epidemic of burnout and the constant pressure to be flawless. She carried the heavy burden of a world that forgets God's infinite, tender mercy. The scriptures offer a balm for the weary. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Yet, for Saint Thérèse, these words felt distant as she navigated the labyrinth of her own mind. She was being refined in a crucible of mental and spiritual suffering. Her only solace was the hidden corner between her bed and the wall, where she sought a silent God. Saint Thérèse practiced mental prayer, trying to reach beyond the static of her scrupulous thoughts to find a father's love. In this solitude, the seeds of her future wisdom were slowly sown. Lord, grant peace to those whose minds are clouded by the fog of scrupulosity and the fear of judgment. Through the intercession of Saint Thérèse, may they discover the liberating truth of your compassionate heart, break the chains of guilt, and lead us into the sunlight of your grace. The midnight bells of 1886 echoed through the frost-covered streets of Lisieux, signaling the arrival of a transformative nativity. 14-year-old Saint Thérèse returned from midnight mass, her heart still clinging to the innocent traditions of childhood. She expected the familiar warmth of family affection to greet her at Les Bissonnets. In France, children placed their shoes by the hearth, waiting for gifts to fill them with magical wonder. Though Saint Thérèse was nearly a woman, her sister Céline insisted on preserving this baby ritual. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the flickering glow of a dying fire. As Saint Thérèse ascended the stairs, the tired voice of Louis Martin drifted from the parlor below. Thank goodness that's the last time we shall have this kind of thing. He sighed wearily. The words pierced Sainte Thérèse like a frozen dagger, threatening to unleash her usual torrent of tears. Celine looked at her younger sister with helpless pity, expecting the familiar collapse of her fragile, sensitive spirit. But in that miraculous second, the grace of Christmas descended upon Sainte Thérèse like a celestial thunderbolt. Jesus had entered her heart, achieving in an instant what years of struggle could not. The little queen swallowed her tears and suppressed the rising tide of her own ego with supernatural strength. Sainte Thérèse descended the stairs with a radiant smile, joyfully exclaiming over the gifts as if no hurt had occurred. She had finally conquered the paralyzing sensitivity that held her soul captive. Modern lives are often enslaved by the fragile ego, where every slight offense becomes a reason for deep resentment. Sainte Thérèse's victory over herself mirrors our own need for emotional resilience and selfless love. She moved beyond the I to find the thou, proving that true strength is born in humility. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Sainte Thérèse lived this scripture on that holy night, trading her weakness for a will of tempered steel. The specific date of December 25th marked the definitive end of her long spiritual winter. Lord, grant us the grace to overcome our petty sensitivities and the selfishness that clouds our daily lives. Through the intercession of Sainte Thérèse, may we find the strength to place the feelings of others above our own. Transform our fragile hearts into vessels of your enduring, sacrificial peace and love. The year 1887 brought a dark cloud over France as the trial of Henri Pranzini gripped the public's macabre fascination. A triple murderer without remorse, he stood as a monument to human depravity and cold-blooded arrogance. While the masses thirsted for his blood, Sainte Thérèse thirsted for his eternal, wretched soul. The young girl, now a warrior of the spirit, launched a relentless assault upon heaven's gates for this condemned criminal. Sainte Thérèse offered every small sacrifice and prayer, refusing to let this man fall into the eternal abyss. She recognized in this monster a brother who was desperately lost in the shadows. "My God, I am sure you will pardon this unhappy Pranzini," she whispered with a conviction that defied earthly logic. Sainte Thérèse sought a sign, not for her own glory, but to prove the infinite reach of divine mercy. She wagered her entire spiritual life on the redemption of a man she never met. In the early dawn of August 31st, the guillotine stood ready in Paris, a terrifying silhouette against the rising sun. Pranzini ascended the scaffold with a defiant sneer, refusing the comforts of a priest until the very last second. The tension in Lisieux was as sharp as the executioner's cold steel blade. Suddenly, a miracle of grace shattered the criminal's iron pride. Before the blade fell, Pranzini snatched a crucifix from the chaplain and kissed the sacred wounds of Christ 3 times. Sainte Thérèse's first child was saved at the precipice of hell. The power of hidden prayer had triumphed over death. Modern society often writes off the broken and the wicked as beyond the reach of hope or meaningful change. Sainte Thérèse's radical empathy challenges our desire for vengeance, reminding us that no soul is truly unreachable. She bridges the gap between the saint and the sinner with a bridge of sacrificial love. I tell you, there is more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons. This scripture came alive as Sainte Thérèse wept tears of profound joy upon hearing the news. Her mission was now clear. She would be a fisher of souls through the secret way. Lord, Teach us to pray for those the world deems unforgivable, and to see the spark of your image in every soul. Through the intercession of Saint Thérèse, grant us the persistence to fight for the lost. May we never despair of your mercy, even in the face of the greatest darkness. The gardens of Les Buissonnets basked in the golden radiance of Pentecost Sunday on May 29, 1887. Sainte Thérèse walked beside her father, Louis Martin, her heart pounding with a secret that burned like a holy fire. The air was heavy with the scent of blooming roses and divine destiny. Louis sat upon a stone bench, watching the sunset dip below the horizon of Lisieux with a quiet, paternal pride. Sainte Thérèse knelt at his feet, her voice trembling but resolute as she requested permission to enter the Carmelite convent. She was only 15, yet her soul was ancient. A heavy silence fell between the father and his little queen as the weight of her words settled into the earth. Louis did not recoil in anger or grief. Instead, he looked at his youngest daughter with a profound, sacrificial understanding. He knew this moment was a sacred summons. Rising with a gentle dignity, Louis approached a nearby stone wall and plucked a tiny white wildflower by its roots. He handed the fragile bloom to Sainte Thérèse, explaining that God had brought it to life and preserved it until today. It was a living symbol of her own hidden vocation. I am the little flower of Jesus, she realized, gazing at the delicate petals that mirrored her own smallness and strength. Saint Thérèse understood that she was called to bloom for the Creator alone, rooted in the soil of humility. The symbol of her entire spiritual journey was born. Modern seekers often struggle to find their unique purpose amidst the loud, distracting demands of a digital and frantic world. Sainte Thérèse's little flower reminds us that greatness is found in being exactly who God intended us to be. True identity is discovered in surrender, not in worldly noise. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Saint Thérèse embraced this scripture as she held the uprooted flower, sensing her own imminent departure from home. The fire of the Holy Spirit had ignited her path. Lord, give us the courage of Saint Thérèse to follow your call, even when it requires leaving everything we love behind. Through her intercession, may we recognize ourselves as your precious flowers, destined to bloom in your eternal garden. Grant us the peace to trust in your plan. The iron gates of the Lisieux Carmel seemed to shrink before the formidable presence of Canon de la Troette, the convent's superior. He stood as a pillar of rigid tradition, flatly refusing to allow a 15-year-old child to enter the cloister. Sainte Thérèse faced a wall of authority more daunting than any stone. Dressed in her finest attire to appear older, Sainte Thérèse journeyed to Bayeux to confront the ecclesiastical powers directly. She stood before Bishop Hugonin, her heart a drumbeat of holy defiance against the skepticism of men. The little queen was no longer a shy girl, but a soldier of Christ. The bishop's palace felt cold and imposing, a labyrinth of velvet and ancient law that offered no easy passage. Despite her eloquent pleas, the prelate hesitated, advising the young girl to wait for more maturity. Sainte Thérèse felt the sting of rejection from the very church she sought to serve. I will not take no for an answer, she resolved, her blue eyes flashing with a celestial, unyielding fire. Sainte Thérèse realized that earthly barriers were merely tests of her divine resolve and spiritual persistence. She was prepared to climb over every human obstacle to reach the feet of her beloved. Modern believers often face the cold walls of bureaucracy and the discouraging silence of leadership when pursuing their dreams. Saint Thérèse's struggle against the bishop's wall serves as a beacon for those fighting for their true purpose. She teaches us that holy ambitions requires both humility and relentless courage. The scriptures declare, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened." Saint Thérèse lived this promise, refusing to let her youth be a reason for exclusion. She prepared to take her desperate case to the highest court in the world. Louis Martin watched his daughter struggle with a mixture of agony and profound admiration for her steel-like spirit. He did not ask her to surrender. Instead, he prepared for a journey that would take them to the heart of Rome. The battle for her vocation was only just beginning. Lord, grant us the persistence of Saint Thérèse when the world and its structures block our path to you. Through her intercession, break down the walls of doubt and delay that hinder our spiritual growth. Help us to speak our truth with the boldness of your most humble saints. In November 1887, the iron wheels of a steam train shrieked across the French border, carrying Saint Thérèse toward the Eternal City. As the majestic Swiss Alps towered above like frozen cathedrals, she marveled at the staggering grandeur of God's creation. The world was expanding, yet her focus remained singular. Traveling among nearly 200 pilgrims, the cloistered world of Les Bissonnets was replaced by the chaotic noise of secular life. For the first time, Saint Thérèse walked through the glittering halls of luxury hotels and ancient ruins. She moved through the crowd like a quiet angel, observant of the world's vanity. During this long journey, a startling revelation shook her young soul as she observed the priests accompanying the pilgrimage. She saw their human frailties, their petty impatience, and their moments of worldly pride. It was a shocking awakening for a girl who had previously idealized every man of the cloth. Saint Thérèse realized that even the holiest servants of the altar were made of fragile mortal clay and required constant prayer. Instead of feeling disillusioned, she felt a burning mission to offer her life for the sanctification of priests. Her vocation was deepening, becoming a hidden pillar for the entire church. Modern seekers often stumble when they witness the failures and humanity of those in high positions of spiritual authority. Saint Thérèse's experience reminds us that faith should rest in God alone, while we support the weak with compassion. She teaches us that true love covers a multitude of human imperfections. The scriptures echo through her journey. We have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God. Saint Thérèse embraced this truth as the train roared through Milan and Venice. She was learning that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is always weak. Every city she visited, from the canals of Venice to the shrines of Loreto, was a stepping stone toward her ultimate confrontation. She touched relics and knelt on sacred ground, gathering spiritual strength for the trial ahead. The little queen was preparing to petition the highest authority on the face of the earth, Lord. Protect your priests and strengthen all those who struggle with the heavy burden of their own human weaknesses. Through the intercession of Saint Thérèse, grant us the grace to pray for our leaders instead of judging them. Keep our eyes fixed on your divine light during every journey. On November 20th, 1887, the golden halls of the Vatican hummed with the whispers of aristocrats and prelates. Saint Thérèse moved through the opulent corridors, her heart a drum of holy fire amidst the marble splendor. She approached the throne of Peter, carrying a desperate petition for her sacred vocation. The pilgrims had been strictly forbidden to speak to the Holy Father, a rule enforced by the stern Swiss guards. As the elderly Pope Leo XIII received the faithful, Saint Thérèse felt the crushing weight of silence. The little queen knew this was her final stand against the world's bureaucracy. When her turn arrived, Saint Thérèse collapsed at the feet of the pontiff, her voice breaking through the forbidden stillness. "Holy Father, in honor of your jubilee, permit me to enter Carmel at 15, she cried. The room froze in shock at this tiny girl's audacity before the world's highest authority. Pope Leo XIII looked down at the trembling child with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of nations. "You will enter if it is God's will," he replied with a gentle yet elusive paternal wisdom. Saint Thérèse clung to his knees, refusing to let go of her only hope. 2 guards stepped forward, physically prying Saint Thérèse away from the papal throne as her tears fell upon the velvet. She was carried out of the chamber, a defeated figure in the eyes of men, yet a giant in the eyes of heaven. Her public humiliation was her greatest spiritual victory. Modern souls often feel silenced by the massive structures of power and the cold indifference of institutional walls. Saint Thérèse's courage at the Vatican reminds us that no authority is higher than a soul's direct call from God. She teaches us to speak even when our voices begin to tremble. "Knock, and it shall be opened unto you." The ancient scriptures promise those who possess an unyielding, childlike faith. Saint Thérèse had knocked at the highest door on earth and was seemingly turned away. Yet she walked out of Rome with a spirit that no man could ever break. Lord, grant us the boldness of Saint Thérèse to pursue our divine calling regardless of the obstacles or the rules of men. Through her intercession, give us the strength to stand before the world and proclaim our purpose. May we always trust that your will is our final sanctuary. The dawn of April 9th, 1888, broke over Lisieux with a somber, gray light that mirrored the gravity of the hour. At Les Bissonnets, the breakfast table was a stage for a silent, heartbreaking drama. Saint Thérèse prepared to leave her earthly paradise, trading her velvet life for the coarse wool of sacrifice. Every corner of the house whispered memories of a childhood built on the tender devotion of her sisters and father. Saint Thérèse embraced the walls, the garden, and the shadows one last time, her heart breaking with every step toward the door. The little queen was surrendering her throne for a cross. The journey to the Carmel of Lisieux was a short walk, but an eternal crossing between 2 worlds. Louis Martin walked beside his youngest daughter, his face a mask of noble agony and divine pride. They moved like shadows through the misty streets, toward the heavy, iron-studded gates that awaited their arrival. At the threshold of the enclosure, Saint Thérèse knelt on the cold pavement to receive her father's final blessing. Louis traced the sign of the cross on her forehead, his hands trembling with the weight of this total surrender. It was the ultimate offering of a father to his eternal king. The heavy doors groaned on their hinges, revealing the silent, veiled figures of the Carmelite sisters waiting within the shadows. Saint Thérèse stepped across the threshold, and the massive iron lock slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the street. The world died behind her, and her new life began. Modern society often fears the silence of commitment and the perceived loss of freedom found in sacred vows. Saint Thérèse's final farewell reminds us that true liberty is found only when we lock ourselves within the will of God. She traded the fleeting noises of the world for an eternal, divine conversation. Whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Saint Thérèse lived this gospel paradox as the iron gates sealed her destiny. She was now a prisoner of love, hidden from the eyes of men but radiant in the sight of heaven. Lord, give us the courage of Saint Thérèse to leave behind the comforts that hinder our journey toward your light. Through her intercession, help us to embrace our own final farewells to the vanities of this world. May we find our true home within the sanctuary of your heart. The romantic illusions of convent life vanished beneath the biting frost of the Lisieux Carmel's stone corridors. Saint Thérèse found herself in a world where the air was a razor and the silence was heavy with hidden discipline. The pampered child of Les Buissonnets now faced the stark, freezing reality of the cross. The winter of 1888 was a relentless adversary, turning the unheated cells into icy tombs that sapped her strength. Her hands, once accustomed to delicate lace, grew red and cracked from the lye and freezing water of the laundry. Saint Thérèse offered every shiver as a secret rose to her divine spouse. Hunger became a constant companion as the meager, often tasteless portions of the refectory left her stomach aching with emptiness. She never complained, quietly consuming the worst leftovers, while the other sisters remained unaware of her silent sacrifice. Saint Thérèse was learning that a soldier's strength is forged in the fires of deprivation. Mother Marie de Gonzague, the formidable prioress, watched the young novice with a cold and piercing gaze of scrutiny. She treated Saint Thérèse with deliberate harshness, frequently rebuking her in public to crush any lingering traces of worldly pride. The little queen was being hammered upon the anvil of absolute stripping humility. "What are you doing here, you lazy child?" the prioress would demand, even when Thérèse was exhausted from labor. Saint Thérèse bowed her head, accepting the stings of injustice without a single word of self-defense or bitterness. She understood that these humiliations were the precious stones required to build her celestial crown. Modern lives are often consumed by a desperate search for comfort and the immediate avoidance of any perceived slight or hardship. Saint Thérèse's Winter of the Soul reminds us that true character is built not in the sunshine, but in the freezing shadows of discipline. She found warmth in the fire of love. The scriptures echoed through the drafty cloisters. "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross." Saint Thérèse lived these words through every numb finger and every stinging rebuke from her superiors. She was no longer a child playing at holiness. She was a warrior. Lord, grant us the endurance of Saint Thérèse when we face the long winters of our own lives and spirits. Through her intercession, help us to find joy in our daily sacrifices and to welcome the discipline that purifies our hearts. May your love be the fire that never goes out. Within the silent cloisters of Lisieux, Saint Thérèse embraced the mundane tasks that most would consider beneath their dignity. She found a hidden majesty in the rhythm of the broom and the steam of the laundry room. To her, every menial chore was a secret battlefield where pride was conquered. While others dreamed of grand missionary adventures or spectacular martyrdom, Saint Thérèse focused on the tiny, invisible details of daily life. She swept the stone floors as if she were decorating a palace for a king. Her little way turned the ordinary into an extraordinary tapestry of divine devotion. The mask of humility was not a hollow performance, but a genuine shield against the world's desire for recognition. Saint Thérèse chose the most overlooked duties, seeking no praise from the prioress or her sisters. She understood that God's gaze falls most tenderly upon the smallest, most hidden acts. "Love proves itself by deeds," she whispered, while folding heavy, damp linens in the drenching heat of the wash-house. Saint Thérèse believed that a single pin picked up with love could save a soul from the abyss. She was an architect of the spirit, building a cathedral out of shadows. Modern society is often obsessed with the loud pursuit of fame and the hollow validation of the public spotlight. Saint Thérèse's quiet labor challenges our need to be seen, reminding us that true impact occurs in silence. She teaches us that greatness is not measured by scale, but by intentional love. The scriptures proclaim a radical truth. Whoever is least among you all is the one who is great. Saint Thérèse lived this paradox daily, finding her throne in the kitchen and her crown in the dust. She realized that the shortest path to heaven was paved with small, sacrificial stones. One day, she was accused of breaking a precious vase she had not even touched during her chores. Instead of defending her honor, Saint Thérèse knelt and begged for forgiveness with profound sincerity. She wore the mask of the guilty to keep the peace, imitating the silence of her master. "Lord, grant us the wisdom of Saint Thérèse to find beauty and purpose in the small, repetitive tasks of our lives. Through her intercession, strip away our vanity and our constant need for applause. May we learn to serve you with a joyful heart in the hidden corners of the world." The devastating news struck the Carmel like a thunderbolt, shattering the serene silence of Saint Thérèse's cloistered world. Her beloved father, the noble Louis Martin, had suffered a terrifying mental collapse that stripped him of his dignity. The patriarch who once embodied strength was now lost in a fog of hallucinations. In a cruel twist of fate, the man who had given everything to God was taken to an asylum for the insane. Saint Thérèse endured the agonizing reports of her father's confusion, imagining his beloved face behind the cold, locked doors of a madhouse. Her heart bled for the patriarch's public humiliation. The gossiping tongues of Lisieux wagged with pity and judgment, casting a dark shadow over the once respected Martin name. From behind her veil, Saint Thérèse felt the sting of their whispers. Yet she chose to embrace this cross with supernatural courage. She offered her father's shattered mind as a final sacrifice. As a cloistered nun, she was forbidden from visiting the man who had been her earthly king and spiritual guide. Saint Thérèse wept in the shadows of the chapel, her soul echoing the cry of the abandoned. She was learning the bitter cost of total surrender in the garden of her own Gethsemane. Modern families often face the harrowing darkness of mental illness and the heavy stigma that follows such tragic declines. Saint Thérèse's secret agony mirrors the hidden pain of those watching their loved ones vanish into the labyrinth of the mind. She teaches us that dignity remains even when the intellect fails. The ancient scriptures cry out from the depths of human sorrow, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Saint Thérèse made this lament her own, yet she refused to let her faith be extinguished by the storm. She saw the holy face of Jesus reflected in her father's suffering. She realized that this absolute stripping of worldly honor was the final preparation for her father's eternal, heavenly crown. Saint Thérèse prayed that Louis's humiliation would serve as a bridge for the salvation of countless lost souls. His brokenness became the foundation for a deeper, more mystical union with the divine. Lord, comfort those who suffer the silent agony of watching their loved ones fade into the shadows of mental illness. Through the intercession of Saint Thérèse, grant us the grace to see your presence in the broken and the confused. May our love remain steadfast during the most humiliating trials. The morning of September 8th, 1890, dawned with a celestial clarity over the Carmel of Lisieux, marking the nativity of Mary. Saint Thérèse prepared for her spiritual nuptials, her soul dressed in a garment of pure longing and absolute surrender. Today, the little queen would become the bride of the eternal King. Beneath the ancient crucifix of the chapel, Saint Thérèse knelt to pronounce her solemn vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. She renounced the world's empty riches to embrace the hidden treasure of the cross. Each word was a seal of fire, binding her heart to the divine spouse for all eternity. The silence of the sanctuary was filled with an invisible, heavenly choir as Saint Thérèse accepted her lifelong exile. She traded her noble family name for the title of Child Jesus and the Holy Face. Her identity was now consumed by the burning light of the one who died for love. In her pocket, she carried a small note detailing her deepest desires: to save souls and to love Jesus as he had never been loved. Saint Thérèse understood that her profession was not a destination, but the beginning of a total immolation. She was a living sacrifice offered upon the altar. Modern society often views the concept of lifelong vows as a restrictive chain that stifles personal freedom and growth. Saint Thérèse's profession reminds us that true liberty is found in the total gift of oneself to a higher, divine purpose. She discovered a vast, infinite ocean within the narrow walls. The scriptures proclaim the beauty of this sacred union. Set me as a seal upon your heart, for love is strong as death. Saint Thérèse lived this eternal truth as she prostrated herself before the altar. She was no longer her own. She was the property of divine mercy. Though her father remained absent, lost in the shadows of his illness, his spirit seemed to bless her from the distance. Saint Thérèse offered her vows for his healing and for the sanctification of the entire world. Her profession of love was a bridge built between heaven and earth. Lord, grant us the courage to make a total profession of love to you in our daily lives and vocations. Through the intercession of Saint Thérèse, help us to remain faithful to our promises and to find joy in our sacrifices. May our lives be a perpetual hymn to your glory. The industrial age roared outside the convent walls, introducing mechanical wonders that redefined the limits of human capability. Within her cell, Saint Thérèse contemplated the daunting, steep stairs of perfection that many saints had climbed with heroic agony. She felt too small and too weak to ascend such heights by her own power. We live in an age of inventions, she mused, observing how modern elevators spared the wealthy from exhausting climbs. Saint Thérèse sought a spiritual equivalent, a divine lift that would carry a tiny soul directly to the summit of sanctity. She refused to be discouraged by her own undeniable littleness. Searching the sacred scriptures, she discovered the golden key. Whosoever is a little one, let him come to me. Saint Thérèse realized that the arms of Jesus were the celestial elevator she had been seeking. To reach the heights, she did not need to grow great, but to become smaller. This little way was a revolution of the heart, stripping away the heavy armor of complicated theological systems. Saint Thérèse taught that holiness was accessible to the ordinary soul through absolute trust and childlike surrender. She replaced the fear of a demanding judge with the embrace of a merciful Father. Modern humanity often collapses under the suffocating pressure of self-improvement and the relentless pursuit of unattainable perfection. Saint Thérèse's lift to heaven offers a sanctuary for the exhausted, reminding us that our weaknesses are magnets for God's grace. She invites us to stop climbing and start trusting. The gospel confirms this humble path. Truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter heaven. Saint Thérèse made this ancient wisdom her living constitution, proving that spiritual infancy is the highest form of maturity. She found strength in her admitted poverty. Her discovery was a beacon for those lost in the labyrinth of religious rigor and cold, intellectual pride. Saint Thérèse transformed the spiritual life into a simple act of breathing in the love of Christ. The elevator of grace was always waiting, provided one had the humility to step inside. Lord, grant us the childlike confidence of Saint Thérèse to trust in your lifting arms when we are too weary to climb. Through her intercession, free us from the pride of self-reliance and the fear of failure. May we find our rest in the simplicity of your infinite mercy. The internal dynamics of the Lisieux Carmel shifted when Pauline was elected prioress. Yet Saint Thérèse remained a permanent novice to appease jealous hearts. Despite her humble rank, she was entrusted with the spiritual formation of the new candidates. She became a hidden master, guiding souls through the labyrinth of religious life. Saint Thérèse approached her duties not with the iron rod of traditional discipline, but with a revolutionary spirit of maternal love. She discarded the cold, rigid methods of the past, focusing instead on the unique interior landscape of each soul. Her unconventional wisdom began to challenge the convent's established, austere atmosphere. To love is to give everything, and to give oneself, she whispered to the young women who sought her counsel. Saint Thérèse taught them to find God in the smallest irritations and the most difficult personalities. She was a spiritual architect, rebuilding the foundations of sanctity through the power of mercy. Conflicts frequently erupted with the formidable Mother Marie de Gonzague, who still clung to the old ways of fear and severe penance. Saint Thérèse stood her ground with a quiet, steel-like resolve, defending her little way against those who preferred a more arduous climb. She was a gentle rebel. Even her own flesh and blood, her sisters Marie and Céline, had to learn to see Saint Thérèse as their superior. She did not hesitate to correct their faults with a surprising, surgical precision that cut through family sentimentality. The little queen was now a formidable captain of the spiritual life. Modern leaders often struggle to balance the demands of authority with the necessity of authentic, compassionate connection. Saint Thérèse's mentorship reminds us that true influence is born from personal example rather than empty titles. She teaches us that the heart is won through sacrifice, not through the exercise of power. The scriptures offer a timeless guide for her mission. The greatest among you will be your servant. Saint Thérèse lived this paradox daily, washing the feet of her novices through tireless prayer and patient correction. She proved that a humble soul could steer a ship through the most turbulent waters. Lord, grant us the wisdom of Saint Thérèse to lead others with a spirit of love and profound humility. Through her intercession, help us to see your image in those entrusted to our care. May we learn that true authority is found in the gentle service of your eternal kingdom. As Easter approached in 1896, a thick, suffocating fog descended upon the soul of Saint Thérèse, extinguishing the vibrant lights of her inner sanctuary. The once certain hope of heaven vanished, replaced by a wall of impenetrable darkness. The little flower was entering the most terrifying battlefield of her spiritual life. The enemy of peace whispered cold, mocking taunts into her ear, suggesting that the afterlife was merely a beautiful, hollow illusion. Saint Thérèse felt like a traveler lost in a sunless desert, where every prayer seemed to echo into a vast, empty void. Her faith was being stripped to the bone. "I believe because I want to believe," she declared, her will clashing against the rising tide of existential despair. Saint Thérèse sat at the table of sinners, sharing the bread of sorrow with those who denied the existence of God. Her spiritual martyrdom was hidden beneath a calm, radiant smile. In this agonizing night of faith, she discovered that true love does not depend on warm feelings or celestial visions. Saint Thérèse clung to the hem of Christ's garment in the pitch-black silence, proving her devotion through pure, naked trust. She was a soldier standing guard in a frozen trench. Modern humanity often wanders through a wilderness of doubt, haunted by the fear that our existence is a meaningless accident of nature. Saint Thérèse's internal war mirrors our own struggles with unbelief and the search for light. She teaches us that faith is a choice, not a feeling. The ancient scriptures cry out from the depths of the abyss, "My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When can I go and meet him?" Saint Thérèse lived this thirst while her mind was besieged by the terrifying thought of eternal nothingness. She offered her darkness for the world. Despite the interior agony, Saint Thérèse continued to perform her duties with a heroic, gentle grace that deceived even her closest sisters. She was an invisible champion of the cross, fighting a war that left no scars on the flesh, but tempered her spirit like the finest, hardest steel. Lord, sustain those who walk through the long, lonely nights of doubt and the crushing shadows of spiritual emptiness. Through the intercession of Saint Thérèse, grant us the courage to trust your promises, even when we cannot see your light. May our hearts remain anchored in your eternal truth. The bells of Good Friday, 1896, tolled with a mournful resonance through the silent corridors of the Carmel. Saint Thérèse lay in the absolute stillness of her cell, her body exhausted from the Lenten fast and the weight of her secret spiritual darkness. A sudden, violent cough shattered the midnight silence. Reaching for a handkerchief in the shadows, Saint Thérèse felt a warm, metallic flow that signaled a terrifying arrival. In the dim light of dawn, she looked upon a bright crimson stain, the red signal of tuberculosis. The messenger of death had finally knocked at the door of the little flower. Instead of trembling with fear, Saint Thérèse felt a profound, supernatural joy flooding her weary soul. She welcomed the blood as a sacred invitation to the eternal wedding feast of her divine spouse. The young nun recognized that her earthly exile was reaching its final agonizing yet glorious crescendo. Saint Thérèse kept the discovery hidden, continuing her grueling chores with a radiant smile that masked her failing lungs. She washed heavy linens in freezing water, each breath becoming a silent, burning sacrifice for the salvation of souls. The warrior within her refused to retreat before the advancing shadows of mortality. Modern society often flees from the reality of illness, viewing physical suffering as an ultimate defeat or a meaningless tragedy. Saint Thérèse's red signal challenges our fear of the end, reminding us that even our brokenness can be a masterpiece of grace. She transformed her biological decline into a spiritual victory. The scriptures proclaim a radical promise. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory. Saint Thérèse lived this triumph as she walked the path of the cross toward her own Calvary. She saw the blood not as an end, but as a divine crimson bridge. Mother Marie de Gonzague remained unaware of the fire burning within the lungs of her youngest charge. Saint Thérèse offered her silence as a final gift, proving that true heroism often wears the mask of ordinary routine. Her life was spilling out like wine poured for the thirst of the world. Lord, grant us the courage to face our own mortality with the unwavering hope and joy of Saint Thérèse. Through her intercession, help us to see every trial as an invitation to your eternal embrace. May we transform our sufferings into a beautiful hymn of praise for your mercy. The flickering candlelight in the infirmary cast long, dancing shadows against the stone walls as Saint Thérèse gripped her pen. Each word was carved from the raw material of her physical agony, yet her prose flowed with celestial grace. She was writing the history of a soul for all eternity. Tuberculosis ravaged her lungs, turning every breath into a grueling struggle for survival. Despite the suffocating pain, Saint Thérèse obeyed the command to record her memories, capturing the little way in ink. Her notebook became a sacred vessel, holding the distilled wisdom of a heart prepared for the ultimate sacrifice. "I must hurry," she whispered, her hand trembling as the fever burned through her fragile veins. Saint Thérèse transformed her sickbed into a scriptorium, where suffering was the primary ink and love was the divine parchment. She was composing a heroic epic of the interior life amidst the encroaching shadows. The story of a soul was not a dry journal, but a vibrant cinematic journey of a spirit conquering the world through weakness. Saint Thérèse revealed how a small, hidden life could ignite a global soul of devotion. She poured her remaining lifeblood into pages that would soon heal millions of broken hearts. Modern seekers often drown in a sea of digital noise, searching for an authentic voice amidst the hollow echoes of fame. Saint Thérèse's literary masterpiece reminds us that the most profound truths are often born in the silence of endurance. She teaches us that our greatest work is our own surrender. The scriptures proclaim a timeless truth. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Saint Thérèse lived this mystery with every stroke of her pen, proving that physical decay cannot dim the light of the spirit. Her pain was the crucible of a literary miracle. As the manuscript neared its conclusion, she knew these hidden writings would eventually fall like a shower of roses upon the earth. Saint Thérèse offered her words as a spiritual legacy for those who felt too small for greatness. She was a poet of the cross, singing in the dark. Lord, grant us the perseverance of Saint Thérèse to use our talents for your glory, even in our hours of deepest suffering. Through her intercession, may we find the words to express our love for you. Let our lives become a living story that speaks of your infinite, tender mercy. The autumn wind of 1897 rattled the infirmary windows. Yet a celestial heat burned within the dying Saint Thérèse. She lay upon her bed of thorns, gazing beyond the veil of mortality with an unearthly, prophetic clarity. The little flower was preparing for her greatest mission across the stars. After my death, I will let fall a shower of roses, she whispered to her weeping sisters. Saint Thérèse promised that her departure from this world would not be an end, but a thunderous beginning. She vowed to spend her heaven doing good upon the weary, suffering soil of the earth. This was no mere sentimental dream. It was a solemn, heroic oath from a soul who had conquered the fear of death. Saint Thérèse envisioned herself as a divine messenger, raining down graces, miracles, and comfort upon those who invoked her name. Her smallness was about to become an infinite power. The air in the room seemed thick with the invisible fragrance of 1,000 blossoms waiting to bloom. Saint Thérèse understood that her little way would soon become a global highway for the lost and the broken. She was ready to trade her quiet cell for the vast, eternal battlefield of love. Modern hearts often feel abandoned by the heavens, lost in a cold universe where the divine seems silent and distant. Saint Thérèse's shower of roses reminds us that the saints are not distant statues, but living, active friends. She teaches us that death cannot stop a heart determined to serve. The scriptures proclaim a glorious victory. He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Saint Thérèse made this promise her own, intending to be the instrument of God's comfort for every generation. She saw herself as a soldier of mercy returning to the front lines. As her physical strength ebbed away, her spiritual authority grew to a terrifying and beautiful intensity. Saint Thérèse offered her final, shallow breaths as a deposit for the miracles she would perform from the heights of glory. The little queen was reclaiming her throne in the kingdom of the soul. Lord, open our hearts to receive the shower of roses that Saint Thérèse sends from your eternal presence. Through her intercession, may we experience the tangible touch of your grace in our daily struggles. Help us to believe that the best of our service is yet to come through you. The evening shadows of September 30th, 1897, draped the Lisieux infirmary in a sacred, expectant hush. Saint Thérèse lay upon her bed, her physical frame exhausted by a final, agonizing struggle for breath. The bells of the Carmel tolled softly, echoing the heartbeat of a soul poised for flight. Her sisters gathered in a circle of weeping love, witnessing the slow, majestic immolation of the little flower. Every gasp was a prayer, every flicker of her eyes a silent communication with the invisible. Saint Thérèse was not merely dying. She was being consumed by the fire of divine longing. The suffocating weight of tuberculosis reached its terrible climax, yet her spirit remained an unyielding fortress of peace. Saint Thérèse gripped her crucifix with trembling fingers, her gaze fixed upon the image of her beloved. The little queen was preparing to step across the threshold into her eternal kingdom. At precisely 7:20 in the evening, a sudden radiance seemed to illuminate her pale, suffering features. Saint Thérèse looked upward with a final, breathtaking expression of wonder and absolute ecstasy. It was as if the veil of heaven had parted to reveal the face of the one she adored. "My God, I love you," she whispered, her voice a fragile bridge between the finite and the infinite. With these last sublime words, the heart of Saint Thérèse ceased to beat on this mortal earth. At 24, her short life ended, yet her true, eternal mission had only just begun. Modern souls often fear the finality of the grave, viewing the end of youth as a tragic waste of potential. Saint Thérèse's final "I love you" reminds us that a life's value is measured by the intensity of its love, not its duration. She transformed her death into a victory. The scriptures proclaim the ultimate triumph over the shadows of the tomb. "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race." Saint Thérèse lived this apostolic victory in the silence of her cell. proving that the smallest soul can achieve the greatest, most enduring spiritual conquest. Lord, grant us the grace to end our days with the same profound love and trust as Saint Thérèse. Through her intercession, remove our fear of the unknown and fill our hearts with the hope of your presence. May our final breath be a song of love to you. The small, inconspicuous grave in the Lisieux cemetery could not contain the explosive power of the spirit buried within. Almost immediately, the story of a soul ignited a global conflagration of faith, crossing oceans and language barriers. The hidden nun of Carmel had suddenly become the world's most beloved companion. From the muddy trenches of the Great War to the humblest huts in distant missions, miracles fell like the promised roses. Soldiers and scholars alike invoked the name of Saint Thérèse, finding hope in her little way. The silent girl who never left her cell was now conquering the entire globe. In 1925, a sea of 50,000 pilgrims flooded Rome as Pope Pius XI declared her a saint of the Universal Church. The little queen was raised to the altars with a speed that defied historical precedent. Her childhood dreams of being a warrior and a martyr were finally gloriously realized. A magnificent basilica rose upon the hills of Lisieux, a mountain of white stone visible for miles across the French countryside. This grand monument stands as a testament to the staggering impact of a soul that chose to remain small. Saint Thérèse had transformed her littleness into an unshakable, eternal empire. In 1997, Pope John Paul II bestowed upon her the prestigious title of Doctor of the Church, honoring her profound theological depth. Saint Thérèse proved that one does not need vast libraries to understand the heart of God. Her simple doctrine of love became a pillar of modern Christian thought. Modern humanity, lost in a labyrinth of complex ideologies and digital isolation, finds a home in her accessible wisdom. Saint Thérèse's global victory reminds us that the most potent force in the universe is not power, but pure sacrificial love. She remains a doctor for the broken and the weary. The scriptures celebrate this divine reversal of worldly values. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. Saint Thérèse lived this sacred paradox to its fullest, proving that a grain of sand can move mountains. Her legacy is a light that no darkness can ever extinguish. Lord, we thank you for the radiant life and the enduring little way of Saint Thérèse of Lisieux. Through her intercession, guide us to find holiness in our daily lives and to trust in your merciful love. May we always walk the path of the heart toward your kingdom.